Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. On today's video I'm going to be showing you some basic hand tools. I'm going to be showing you the different types of tools, the different applications that those types are used for, and just some other general information around that. So in front of me today I've got a bit of an arrangement of sockets. That's going to be the theme of today's video. I'm going to go through and explain the different types of sockets, what those different types are used for, and the different tools that those sockets are meant for. Alright, so the first one we're going to look at today is just the standard multi-hex socket. So this is just a standard multi-hex chrome socket in 3/4 drive. So basically multi-hex sockets are good for just about everything. Only thing that they're not very good for is for using on one of these. So the reason I say that is multi-hex sockets are designed to be used on a ratchet or a breaker bar or something like that. They're not designed to be used on a rattle gun. The reason behind that is these multi-hex sockets are made out of a different material to say your impact sockets, so one of these ones. What tends to happen is that these are a harder socket, so they're more brittle, which means that if you use them on a rattle gun, the vibrations and the impact caused by the rattle gun can actually cause these sockets to fracture. What these are good for is to use on a ratchet, just undoing standard bolts and everything like that. These are a good all-rounder socket, definitely probably one of the most common ones that you'll see out and about. They obviously come in lots and lots of different sizes. This one's a 1 inch and 3/16, so this is an imperial socket. What you want to keep in mind is the work that you're doing. You want to see if your sockets are, so your bolts are metric or imperial. I'm in Australia, so we generally use metric sockets. Some machinery, stuff that comes from the States and bits and pieces like that, does have imperial size bolts and fasteners on them, so you will need to take that into account if you're working on things from America or anywhere like that. Other types of chrome sockets that there are, which I'll show you a photo of as well, are these LokOn sockets. LokOn sockets are brilliant for use with a rounded bolt. So I'll show the photo up again just quickly. You'll see inside this socket there are little teeth. These teeth are designed, as the socket turns, to bite into a rounded bolt, grip it, and turn the bolt. If you use a multi-hex socket on a rounded bolt, chances are you can either cause damage to the socket or you're just going to round the bolt off even further. These LokOn sockets, this is a king chrome socket, a 1 16th inch socket here. These are brilliant for using on rounded bolts. Really, really good. Again, chrome socket can't be used on a rattle gun, even though I have used these on rattle guns before for those really difficult bolts to get at. Really, really good all-rounder socket. These king chrome ones, I've had these for years. They've been tortured pretty well. The little teeth that are inside the socket are amazingly strong. I have not actually broken a single one of these yet, even though I have definitely tried. Definitely a good socket if you are fighting with rounded bolts or a bolt that you think is in a bit of a tricky situation and you might have to sort of get onto the bolt on a little bit of a funny angle or anything like that. These are the best thing to use for that. If you do have a bolt that is completely rounded, there are other types of sockets which are designed for undoing those specific bolts. I'll probably do that in the next video. The next video that I might make, I might do one around sort of more specialized sockets and the things that they're used for. So overall, the chrome multi-point sockets are a good all-rounder. You've obviously got your couple of different choices there. Now with this LokOn socket is also a single hex socket, meaning that it doesn't have all of the little points in there like this multi-hex one does. It's a single hex socket, which means that when you put it over the top of the bolt, it grips a lot better onto the bolt as well. Less chance of rounding something. You can buy these standard single hex sockets without the LokOn teeth in them, but I would always recommend getting these LokOn ones. They are just brilliant for pretty much everything you're going to use them for, and they work really well for undoing those rounded bolts. Now the next one is still onto the chrome sockets. These ones are chrome deep sockets. So these are designed for, say if you had this bolt here and you wind this all the way on, so now you've got a nut here that you want to undo, but you've got all this thread. If you get, say, a standard size or short socket and you try and put it over there, you'll run out. Imagine you put the ratchet on here, ratchet on there like that. When you go to undo it, you see there, the bolt bottoms out on the anvil of the ratchet. So you can't get the socket onto that nut. That's where your deep sockets come in. So here we have got one of our chrome deep sockets. Again, these can't be used on a rattle gun. Same thing as with the standard chrome sockets. They are made of a harder metal, so they're more brittle. When you put them on an impact gun, they can crack or explode while you're using it. So always be mindful of that. Ratchet only or breaker bar. Again, you got to be careful with breaker bar. These can snap or crack using a breaker bar as well. So with the deep socket, basically that just goes on there like that. The socket's the wrong size for the nut, so it's not going to fit over it. But basically that will allow you to undo the nut. These are also good if you've got a bolt that, say, is hidden down away somewhere and you need that little bit of extra length on your ratchet to get it. Again, you can use an extension, but still handy all-rounder. That's just a standard multi-hex socket as well. On to the next one. This one here is a spark plug socket. So this is designed for removing spark plugs from petrol engines. Now, inside this socket, this one doesn't have one in there, I've just realised because it's come out. Inside a spark plug socket, there is normally a piece of rubber in the bottom of the socket. What that piece of rubber does is over the end of the spark plug, when you put the socket down over the spark plug, the end of the spark plug goes through a small hole in the piece of rubber. It grips onto the spark plug, so when you pull the socket out of the spark plug tube, the spark plug comes with it. And then you can just very easily pull the spark plug out of the socket. When you go to reinstall the new ones, because spark plugs don't like being dropped, you can just push the spark plug back into the little rubber retainer, put it down into the tube and do the spark plug up. Really, really handy socket, especially when you get the spark plugs that are in a bit of a hard to reach spot, or you know, right down in the bottom, in the top of the engine somewhere where the spark plugs are difficult to get out without anything like that. If you don't have one of these and you need to get spark plugs out and you've just got, say, a standard long series socket or a deep socket, sorry. Good thing to do as well, if you've got one of those long magnetic tools, you can use that out, tap it on the top of the spark plug, pull the spark plug out that way. But these are a really good handy spark plug socket, these ones. They've got a very thin wall on them as well, which is designed obviously for getting down in those small little channels where the spark plugs are. So another really handy one. This one here is just another version of a deep socket. So this is like I was saying before, so this is a single hex deep socket. This one is a 12mm, so it's a metric deep socket. So this one is just a completely standard 12mm single hex deep socket. This one is for a quarter ratchet. Again, chrome, can't use it on an impact gun. It's quarter anyway, you wouldn't use it on an impact anyway. Well, you could try, but it's probably not going to work very well. Okay, so on to the ones designed for rattle guns. Now, this one here, this is a big socket. It's a pretty stubby little socket, but this is a 21mm square drive socket. So this is actually designed for trucks, for the inner wheel studs on heavy vehicles, basically. So if you've ever seen how a truck's rear wheels are held on the outer wheel, you've got a set of nuts basically that hold that wheel on. Some trucks are different. Some trucks will just have one nut to hold both wheels on. Some trucks, the ones that this socket is for, on the outside they'll have what is normally a 41mm nut on the outside wheel. Undo all those nuts, outside wheel comes off. Then they have another nut slash stud which is designed to hold the inner wheel in. So the inner wheel studs are held on with a square drive 21mm socket, which is what's on the end of this. I'll show a photo up on the screen now. And this is a inch drive socket. So this is designed for a 1-inch rattle gun, or you could put a 1-inch breaker bar and anything like that on it as well. This is a impact socket. So this is specifically designed for use on rattle guns and high impact tools basically. So I have used these on torque multipliers. Really good for using on them when you've got one of those wheel nuts that is just so stuck that even the big rattle guns can't undo it. Really, really good socket. Quite expensive, but if you need them for doing heavy vehicles and bits and pieces like that with, they are brilliant for that purpose. Now, the metal that these impact sockets are designed out of is actually softer, which might sound a little bit weird, but what it allows the socket to do is when the socket is being used on the rattle gun, the socket can actually move slightly or deform slightly, and then when you stop that motion, the socket then returns back to how it was previously. So they're a little bit softer, but they're also a lot thicker in the walls and everything like that to make them a lot stronger as well. So the reason that they use that type of metal is to allow the socket to deform, basically naturally as you use it on a rattle gun. Impact sockets come in all shapes and sizes. So this one here is just a standard single hex impact socket. This is a 16mm one. So 1/2 inch drive, 16mm socket, perfectly standard impact socket. Good little one there. Same as the chrome socket basically, except for use on a rattle gun. The next one here is a deep impact socket, so exactly the same as the chrome one, but for use on a rattle gun. So this one here is an 18mm 1/2 inch drive socket. This one here is an impact socket, but it's a little bit special. You might look at it and go, oh yep, it's all shiny, so it's a chrome socket, but it's not. This is actually an impact socket. Normally these are painted blue to indicate what size they are. There's blue, yellow, and red. So this blue one I think is 17mm. The yellow one is 19mm and the red one is 21mm. So these are designed for cars or automotive application. These are specialized wheel nut sockets. You'll probably notice on the outside of the socket there, they have a layering of plastic on the outside. What that is designed to do is when you put the socket onto the wheel nut and it starts to turn, it's designed so basically if that was to slip off or touch the wheel in any way, it would just rub on the plastic and not the actual metal and damage the wheel. So if you've got a customer's vehicle in that has quite expensive painted wheels on it, these are a good socket to use to stop you from basically scratching or damaging that wheel and having to pay for repair or potentially a new wheel. Really good for that. These are an impact socket, so they can be used on a gun. They're actually designed to be used on a rattle gun as well. They're wheel nut sockets, that's what they're for. So really handy to have, especially if you're dealing with tyres a lot. And you're dealing with customers that might have premium cars and they have expensive wheels on them or anything like that. So that's a bit of an overview of the basic automotive sockets that you would use for undoing bolts, wheel nuts and retainers and bits and pieces like that. Now what we'll get into next is the tools that these sockets go onto. So inside one of these sockets, I will show a photo. There is little detents inside the part of the socket that goes onto the tool. So on a standard chrome socket, these will have little detents in there which lock into the bowl that is on the ratchet here. So on this ratchet, you'll see on that side there's a little bowl that helps hold this socket onto the ratchet. So with this one, it's got a little locking button on the back. So to put the socket on, you have to press the button in, which allows that little bowl to drop down into the anvil. When you put that on, put it over like that, release the button, that will pop the little bowl out and the bowl will sit in one of those detents and that will make it so the socket can't come off. So if I try and pull on that, that socket can't come off that ratchet anymore. Press the button, pull the socket, it's released. Now, some sockets are different. So this one here, for example, has only got the detent on one side. So this is a 3/4 socket. So this is designed for a 3/4 ratchet, a 3/4 breaker bar, something like that. So this one has only got the detent on one side. So what you need to do is when you put this socket on, you need to be mindful on where your retaining bowl is on your tool and where your detent is on your socket. Otherwise, what will happen is when you go to move, or you say if you put it in that position or something like that, and you go to pick it up, the socket's just going to fall off and potentially roll away, or if you're working at heights or anything like that, it could fall off and hit somebody on the head that's underneath you, which you don't want. Right, so that's the basic overview of them. The deep sockets are the same. They've just got the detents in there as well, which are designed to lock onto the ratchet so they can't come off. On the impact sockets, they're a little bit different. So the big impact sockets here, these don't have detents in them at all. So what these have got is these have got holes, which I will show a photo of. What these holes are designed for is, say on a lot of sort of heavy vehicles and heavy tooling, they would actually have a pin on the anvil of the rattle gun or whatever you're using that actually goes into the holes on the side of this socket. So when you're using this, what you would do is you would slide your socket over. Normally the taper on this will allow that pin to be pushed down. Slide the socket over, the pin will pop up through one of these holes and lock that socket onto the anvil of the thing so it can't come off. The way to then get the socket off is to grab a screwdriver or a small tool or something like that, push it down into the hole and push that locking pin back down and then slide the socket off. That's a really good way of holding them on. It's a little bit of a pain when you've got, if you've got to change sockets frequently or stuff like that. where you got to constantly get the thing, push it and pull it off, rather than just being able to pull the socket straight off the gun. This little impact socket does also have that same hole as well for a locking pin. This one does have, on either side of it though, the detents for a standard ratchet as well. So when you put that on the ratchet, that doesn't come off the ratchet until you push the button. With these sockets as well, the little holes that are in the side of it, you can actually use that bowl retainer in one of those little holes to stop the socket coming off. The only thing is, when you do use that, if the hole's a bit bigger than what the ball bearing is that holds it in, it does get a bit of sort of play in it, and they do move back and forth quite a bit, which doesn't really matter as long as they don't come off. The impact deep socket, this one doesn't have any detents in it, it just has the pinholes as well. So when you'll notice with the impact sockets, generally they will have these pinholes in them, which is basically the most secure way of holding that socket on. The reason they do that is because when you're using a rattle gun, especially a powerful one, last thing you want is one of these sockets flying off. So the socket used for wheel nuts here, again, has the little holes in the side for the locking pin to go into. It also has the detents for the standard ball bearing locking mechanism as well. So you can use it on both. Right, so we'll just go over the tools again. So basically this is just a standard 1/2 inch ratchet. What you can see on the side there, you'll see that little ball bearing. That's what retains your sockets when you're using this tool basically. On this one, it does have the safety button on the back, so you actually have to press that button. When you press that button, that little ball bearing will drop down inside the anvil there. When you release the button, the ball bearing pops back up and locks the socket on. Now, this Milwaukee rattle gun, this has got a expansion ring on the end of the anvil here. So what that's designed to do is, when you slide a socket over, so say you get one of these impact sockets, that expansion ring is just a tiny little bit bigger than the 1/2 inch anvil. What it does is, when you push the socket on, it crushes that expansion ring down. Underneath the expansion ring there is a rubber O-ring, which is designed to help keep pressure on it. So what you do is, when you slide this over, they take a little bit of wiggling to get on, like that. Now that expansion ring is putting pressure on the inside of this socket, which is designed to stop the socket from being able to come off. Now the socket will come off quite easily if you pull on it. They pop off just like that. Expansion ring pops back out and it's good to go again. Occasionally these expansion rings do break or they come off. You can replace them though. On to the next rattle gun. So this one here is another Milwaukee rattle gun. This one has a different locking mechanism compared to the expansion ring type and the ball bearing type. So as I was saying before, to do with the impact sockets, is that this Milwaukee gun here does actually have the locking pin on it. So I'll just put that up there, see if it'll focus. It does have the locking pin on this anvil. So when you put this socket on, what you want to do is you want to line the hole in the socket up, slide it over the anvil, give it a bit of a wiggle to try and get it to put that pin down. And now that pin is locked into the hole, and that socket will not come back off there at all. You can do whatever you want, that socket will not come off. Now the way to get this off is to get a little screwdriver, put it down into the hole and push the locking pin down, and then slide the socket off. Sometimes you can get away with putting a bit of pressure on it and wiggling them back and forth. Not with this one. Let me grab a screwdriver and I'll be back.
A few moments later.
So basically, as I was saying, grab a screwdriver. All you need to do, push the screwdriver down into the hole there, push that locking pin down, slide the socket off like that. Like I was saying, it is a little bit of a pain if you've got to swap sockets constantly. To avoid using that locking mechanism, all you do when you put the impact socket on is you would put it on so that the pin lines up with the solid part of the impact socket, basically, so that pin doesn't go into the little locking mechanism and it doesn't lock the socket on. So you do that, wiggle it on like that. What you do need to be mindful of though is that when you're using the impact gun, if that pin is not locked in place, these sockets can just slide straight off. So you've just got to be mindful of that. Also, with these pins as well, be very, very careful if you ever do decide that you're going to use one of your chrome sockets on the impact gun. Sometimes, depending on the socket and the brand, if the detent is deep enough, that little pin will be able to lift all the way up like it is now, and it will permanently lock the socket onto the tool. I have had that happen before, and it's a pain in the backside to get the socket back off the anvil. So if you were to say, I think it would probably do it with this king chrome socket. If I was to put this king chrome socket on, there's no holes on the outside of this socket for me to be able to put a screwdriver down in there and push that pin back down. So, and there's not really any way to get in from the back with like a you know, a thin bit of metal or anything like that to try and push that pin back down. So if it does get stuck on there, you're in for a world of fun to try and get that pin back off. Sometimes you can go in through the front there and find a little piece of metal or something really thin to get down in there and try and wiggle that pin back down and jiggle the socket. It does take a little bit of time, but just something to be mindful of. If you do have ones with this specific type of anvil where they have the locking pin, just be mindful of the sockets that you're putting on there so they don't get permanently stuck on the gun. Because the last thing you want to have to do is cut your anvil off or anything like that to try and get a socket off. That does not sound like fun. So yeah, a couple of different types of sockets here. These are just basically a standard set of automotive sockets, so you'd see these in just about any workshop. Deep sockets, standard short sockets, impact sockets, wheel sockets, and the different types of tools that they go on. Just a bit of an overview. Hope you found some of the information on here handy. If you do have any questions relating to these sockets or different types of applications that they're used for, leave some comments down below. Don't forget to press the thumbs up button if you like this video, and press the subscribe button if you want to see more videos like this. In the next video on the channel, I'll probably look at doing a few more specialized videos. So basically what I'll do is I'll get some sockets that are designed for specific purposes, some of the ones that you don't see quite as often, and I'll explain the different uses for them, the different types of sockets, so you know, your Torx drive sockets, your E-drive sockets, bits and pieces like that, and just explain what they're used for. If you want to see that video, don't forget to press subscribe. Anyway, that's it for me. Have a great day, guys.